Hello and welcome back to our discussion of cardiac physiology. In this segment, we will be talking about contractile cell action potentials. Okay, so in the previous section, we talked about the pacemaker cell action potentials. Now we're going to be talking about the contractile cell action potentials. This is the shape of a contractile cell action potential. I'm not going to go over the details of the mechanism behind the contractile cell action potential, but in case you want to know, it's right here. Okay. But there are a few things about it that I want you to take note of. Okay. So one, really, actually, it's just the one thing that I want you to take note of, which is after you have your peak of your action potential, you have this plateau phase that lasts 100, 200 milliseconds before the cell comes back down to its resting membrane potential. Okay, so we call that a plateau. I think did I say that? I don't know. We call that a plateau. It's due to calcium. I don't think you really need to know that. But the very important implication of having this plateau phase in the action potential is that it prevents this phenomenon that we call tetanus. So let's take a look at tetanus. What is it and why, how does it apply to this situation? Okay, so let's start by looking at this graph right here. What you can see is time is on the x-axis. In red is the action potential in a skeletal muscle. Sorry, I forgot to mention, we're looking at skeletal muscle here. So we're going to compare what happens in cardiac muscle versus skeletal muscle. So here, looking at skeletal muscle, we have our action potential in red. We have the muscle contraction that results from that action potential in blue, okay? And what I want you to notice here is that the action potential is pretty fast, but the muscle contraction lasts quite a while. It develops after the action potential happens. Moreover, shown in yellow is the refractory period for that action potential. Okay, so answering this question down here, when can you generate a second action potential? Basically, as soon as this refractory period is over, you can have another action potential. What that means is that after you have this action potential and have started this muscle contraction here, you can actually have another action potential right here, even before this muscle contraction finishes, or even while it's just barely starting, okay? As a result of that, what you can do in skeletal muscle is you can have several action potentials in a row. So if you look on the right here, each of these little triangles indicates an action potential. If you have them in a row like this, what's going to happen is you are going to, when you have your second action potential, you're going to start a second muscle contraction that is going to add on to your previous muscle contraction because you haven't finished your previous muscle contraction yet. And you can continue to do that to sum together small muscle contractions to make a bigger and more sustained muscle contraction, which is what we refer to as tetanus, okay? However, if we look at cardiac muscle, you can see that this is not the case. So we can't form tetanus, and I'm going to explain to you why. Again, we're looking at the same sort of graph where we have time on the x-axis, the action potential in red, and the muscle tension in blue. And what you can see here is that because we have this plateau phase in our action potential, again, it's going to last 100 or 200 milliseconds, you have this whole long refractory period before you can have another action potential, okay? So by the time you finish this action potential, The muscle contraction that was triggered by that action potential has also almost ended, okay? When we finish our refractory period, when we finish this action potential and we can start a new action potential, that's going to be around here. By the time that happens, our cardiac muscle has already almost completely relaxed. As a result, it's not possible to do what we did in the previous slide with a skeletal muscle, where you can add another muscle contraction on top of the existing muscle contraction, okay? Because the first muscle contraction has already almost ended, okay? So that's shown right here. Oh, and I guess I answered this question in the process. But you generate your muscle tension from that first action potential. By the time you can make a second action potential, right? So that's not shown on the graph here. Oh, it is shown on the graph here with this black arrow. That's your second action potential. By the time you have your second action potential, your muscle has relaxed and your second muscle contraction cannot sum on top of the initial muscle contraction. Therefore, you cannot achieve that state of tetanus like we saw in the skeletal muscle. Here's a little thought question for you. So let's think about this. Why would it be useful to not produce sustained contractions in the heart? Take a few seconds to think about that. Okay, so maybe some of you figured this out, maybe some of you did not, but I'm going to tell you now. Sustained contraction in the heart would be a problem because we want the heart to pump. We want it to contract and then relax so that it can fill with blood again, so that we can pump again, contract again to pump that blood out, right? So if we had a sustained contraction in the heart, we would never have that opportunity for the heart to fill with blood, and we wouldn't really have a starting point for that pumping action, right? So we do need that alternation of contraction and relaxation in the heart.